think in any decision, any habit establishment, we're always thinking about sort of the way up of like cost to benefit, right? That sort of cost to benefit ratio. And I think exercise is just, the benefit is right up here and the cost is extremely low, right? So I truthfully think that every single person on this planet should be doing something physically active and find passion and interest towards that because of the benefits that, I've just mentioned.
Hey mate, I'm Coach Mitch and welcome to the Unbreakable Man podcast. It's my goal to help you achieve excellent results in the area of your health and physical fitness, your career or business, your relationships, and in your own personal passions. This is going to be your one-stop shop if you are the kind of man who wants to achieve his fullest potential in life. And the only way to do that is by becoming unbreakable. All right, welcome to the Unbreakable Man podcast. My name is Coach Mitch, and today my guest is Mr. Daniel Chapelle. He's a bodybuilding and strength coach from Brisbane, and we're going to get to know Daniel a bit today and also have him share his wisdom on how we as men can build our strength and improve our bodies. So Dan, how are you feeling today, mate?
I'm good, man. Any opportunity to come on a podcast and talk about, health, fitness, bodybuilding is definitely my jam. So thank you for the opportunity to jump on today and have a chat with you.
Awesome. No, thanks for being here, man. I appreciate you taking the time. So before we get into the meat of the conversation, I wanted to start off just by giving the audience a little bit of a taste of who Mr. Daniel Chapelle is on a more personal level. So my first question for you, Dan, is what is something that you like to do just for a laugh, mate?
Just for a laugh?
Just for a laugh. What do you do for fun?
These days I'm a busy man when it comes to work, but most of the time what I do is I spend a bit of time gaming. I am a bit of a gamer at heart. So any spare time that I've got, which is minimal these days, is a little bit more gaming.
What do you play at the moment?
I was playing Elden Ring for a while, so on the PS.
Cool.
Demon's Souls, I'm a good fan of the From Software games. But, things like COD as well and some of those games as well. I'm a bit of a Warcraft fiend, so I've been playing World of Warcraft for a good stretch of time ever since I was young. But like I said, I don't have as much time to play as I was probably like to, at this point in my adult life with responsibilities. But other than that, mate, a bit of anime. I enjoy watching anime and just chilling out, man.
Nice.
So it's probably the free time I've got.
We don't want to grow up too much, do we?
No, man, exactly right. I keep saying to my athletes and my clients, like it's all, serious when it comes to the training side of things, but you need some time away from that to just, be yourself and kind of edge out and have a bit of a lifestyle deload of sorts every now and then.
Yeah, well said. Very cool. What is your favorite book, if you have one?
My favorite book?
One that stands out to you.
This is probably a little bit more on the bodybuilding or strength and conditioning side of things, but Eric Helms has basically a nutrition and strength training pyramid, it's sort of like a fundamental guide surrounding, both strength training and nutrition. And I think for myself as a trainer, sort of, coming down from, starting at university and working myself into my career, essentially it was a groundbreaking book for me to understand and sort of solidify my understanding when it came to those particular topics. So, whenever someone comes to me and they sort of say, hey, I'm wanting to get into the industry and is there any books or resources that perhaps, I should read? They're typically the two that I would recommend for a lot of these individuals.
Nice.
So, I don't tend to read too much for leisure these days, but if it had to come down to sort of two resources to assist in what we do, they would probably be the two there.
What are they called?
It's the strength and nutrition training pyramid, which you can purchase from. I'm not going to sound like I'm plugging it here, like I'm sponsored, but I think 3DMJ sell it on their website. So fantastic resources, man.
Awesome. Very cool. Very cool. What is a big goal that you're working on right now for yourself?
Yeah, great question, man. I think at this stage, if I think about it from more as, a competitor, I sort of have two hats that I wear as like the coach's hat and, the competitor hat. For me, my next season of bodybuilding is probably going to be season B, which is sort of end of the year of 2025. So I've still got a couple of years to go, but between seasons, the last season I competed was in 2021, end of the year. So it's a good stretch of time between seasons there. As a natural athlete, we tend to need a little bit more time when it comes to, building our physique, and especially if I have these really large goals of jumping on the world stage for the WNBF and doing really well there. I can see how there's some areas that I really need to improve upon between now and then. So that's sort of my long-term goal at this point in time.
Nice. What's kind of driving that for you? Because that's a big goal, and it's going to require a lot of very specific action, a lot of sacrifice. So what really pushes you in that direction?
Yeah. Look, I think for me, I have such a passion towards bodybuilding. Since I grew up, I got into exercise science, I got into fitness. I think bodybuilding has always sort of been at the forefront in terms of my interest. And because I just love it so much, it's never been something that has, become a chore. Of course, there's days, when it comes to training or tracking or whatever it may be, that, you do lose a little bit of motivation towards the goal. But I think, ultimately I enjoy it so much that's kind of the main driver. It's almost like it's become my identity of sorts. And it's what sort of gives me purpose, I think, as well. Outside of some of the other things, that are important, obviously family and your partner and things like that. So yeah, it's even hard to identify sort of what drives me, because it's just an internal, sort of an internalized thing that just pushes me towards that goal. And I think ultimately it's just because I'm passionate and I just thoroughly enjoy it.
Nice. Awesome. I like that, because it's great to hear that you feel like you have purpose in your life. I think that's it's a big thing that I talk about in a lot of the stuff that I do with Unbreakable Man, because I think it all kind of starts from there, and I think a lot of people are walking around with no real idea why they're here or why they believe they're here and what it is that they're sort of consistently trying to work towards and build. So it's great to hear that you feel like you got that, man. That's a big...
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's one of the primary benefits of exercise as a whole, right? Regardless of whether you've got goals towards competing or anything like that. I mean, having that structure and routine each week of training at certain times, particularly if you've got like sort of a really solid friendship group around that as well, that all go to the gym together, or gives you that certainly gives you that extra sense of purpose above and beyond your identity associated with what you do for work or things like that. Because I think sometimes for some individuals, work is just work, right? It's not someone's primary enjoyment in life. And so certainly you need to have something above and beyond that. I think for a lot of individuals that can be fitness. It can give them that sort of extra layer of identity and purpose within life. So absolutely, I agree.
Nice. And that's a great point too, is that I feel very fortunate in that my purpose and what I do for a living are intertwined. And obviously you have that same privilege as well. And I think a lot of people, when they think about, I have my purpose, and that forms, the majority of how I spend my day, i.e. it's involved in how I make a living, that's not always feasible. And you can't necessarily, your purpose may not necessarily be something that's commercially viable. It might just be important to you. It might be something that you really care about, that really lights you up. So I think it's good to recognize too that, in your search for purpose and meaning in your life, recognize that it doesn't have to necessarily come through your work, whatever it is you do for a living. If you can make it like that, great. But it doesn't have to be that way, and you shouldn't necessarily try to force it.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think a lot of people sometimes want to keep their passions sort of separate from their work as well, and not sort of intertwine them in a way, because it may actually impede upon their ability to thoroughly enjoy that. Like I found, even as myself, within the bodybuilding realm, when I was sort of just a bodybuilder, that was my entire life, and that was it created a hell of a lot of enjoyment when I went to the gym, and I think as much as I still have that same enjoyment, I've got that sort of extra level of responsibility now of also coaching within the space. And so it probably comes from a place where I'll be at the gym, but I'll also be thinking, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. And this probably comes about with everyone's work, really, just the responsibility of adult life. But I know that some individuals, they do want to keep their work very separate from their passions, just as a means of being able to thoroughly enjoy it and have that sort of space away from where they've got time for themselves, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. So far in this conversation, I've alluded to the fact that Dan is actually also my strength coach. So I've been working with this man for the last 6 or 7 months, and I can tell you from experience that all the knowledge and the wisdom and the accountability that I've got out of that experience has put me in a point where I've never been physically stronger than I am right now. And I'm loving seeing the progress in how my body looks as well, which is really, really cool. Because what I found as a trainer and as someone who's been in the gym for quite some time, probably around about the 10-year mark now, 10 to 11 years, is that for probably the last 5 or 6 prior to, working with Dan, I have basically been at the same level for most of that time, weighing about the same, having the same amount of strength, looking roughly about the same, maybe a little bit leaner here and there. But that's been kind of that experience. And deciding to work with yourself was all about, okay, well, I've been at this point for so long and it's time now, I already do all this stuff. I already train, I already eat. So why not just optimize this so that I can get the most out of my body, so I can learn or understand what is my full potential in terms of my physical ability. I'm starting to get closer to that. So I want to say that thank you very much for all your coaching and accountability so far, man. It's going really well. So I'm looking forward to seeing how we progress moving forwards.
Of course, mate. Yeah, you've been fantastic. Truthfully, you've done the work. You train damn hard, and I think ultimately when it comes to hiring a coach as a coach, I can very much vouch for that, because I think even as coaches, as much as we know the tricks of our trade, there is that extra level of accountability associated with having someone else in your corner to assist with the plan. But also, I think we can be somewhat biased to ourselves as to what we need, and perhaps what we're doing is more around what we want to do as opposed to, perhaps what we need to do to excel. And sometimes it takes that extra person to sort of, push us in a certain direction or encourage us to take a certain direction to then, see that improvement. I've, for example, I obviously work with Brandon Kempter and BK, and for anyone who doesn't know who BK is, he's probably one of the best natural bodybuilding coaches and athletes worldwide. I'd say very well renowned within the whole globe, basically, as being an incredible bodybuilder. I've had the luxury of working alongside him, not only as an athlete but also as a coach now. And I can vouch the benefit of having someone in your corner to guide you, because I think when I was sort of first approaching Brandon in terms of coaching, I was in the mindset of do I actually need a coach? Like, I feel like I've gone to university, I've studied my exercise science degree, I've done my post grad, I've done the XYZ, all the shabam, and I'm so glad that I took that leap, because ultimately I would probably be in a similar spot where I would be nowhere near my potential as an athlete or as a coach, actually, because you learn through that process. It's very empowering to learn from somebody else and have a mentor. I think everyone should have a mentor figure within their field. So yes, I completely agree, man. It's super important to have a coach that you can sort of run things past and help you push to that new level. Like, having someone in your corner is just so valuable.
Yeah, totally agree. And one thing I think is interesting about what you said there too is that, I'm a pretty motivated guy as well. Like, a lot of, you can work with a client as a coach and, you really need to hold their hand through the whole process. Whereas for me, if you give me like what you do most of the time, which is you give me a target with my calories and protein macros and all that sort of stuff, and then you give me the program I need to follow, I'll just go and do it. I don't necessarily need someone there to push me through it. However, one thing that I think that is really invaluable about having that mentor, coach, someone to kind of bounce ideas off, is when things don't go right during the week's worth of training or even over a period of time, let's say there's injuries, illness, whatever the issue may be, that's where having that person in your corner is like the difference between quitting and continue to move forwards, or at least getting back on the horse sooner rather than later. So I definitely have experienced that even just over the last 6-7 months. It's not been easy, but having professional advice from someone who genuinely wants to see you succeed does make a massive difference, especially when things don't go to plan.
Absolutely, yeah. It's so valuable to be able to throw ideas across to someone else and get their thoughts. And the thing is with coaching is that it should always be collaborative, right? At the end of the day, I don't think that the coach is on the pedestal and the athlete is below. Like we're both equal in terms of our height, and we're both providing knowledge and value to the equation. I'm learning from, for example, yourself as an athlete, and you're also learning from me as a coach. But ultimately, our goal is the same, and that's to achieve your very best. And for whoever that is, it's whatever goal is in place. I think, like I said, we can be very biased in our own mentalities towards what we need versus perhaps what we want. And certainly, within our career associated with training, there's certainly going to be obstacles along the way. Just like you said, there's going to be injuries, there's going to be sickness, family issues, whatever it may be. And sometimes just, reaching out and being like, hey, this is what's happening. What should I do? And sometimes it's the answer is might be the exact same as what you thought as well. And that's not necessarily means that the service was not valuable or anything like that. It's more so just a reinforcing that, hey, what you're doing is correct. We can progress from here. So absolutely, man. Yeah, so valuable.
Yeah, cool, man. So obviously you're on here today because I wanted to introduce my audience of men who are looking to improve themselves to someone like yourself who's a professional in helping guys build strength and build muscle. And I think that every guy deep down, even if they don't have a lot of experience of training in the gym, or have maybe never, ever even considered themselves to be the kind of guy that would ever be muscular or strong or anything like that. I think deep down, all men want to be physically powerful in some way. We want to, that's one of the things that I believe makes us feel more masculine. It's not the only thing, but it's certainly a factor. And, for all the guys that are watching this, I'm hoping today that we can inspire and encourage some action, and then also give these guys some really good information to help them start to move forwards in that direction and in improving that area of their lives. So what I wanted to do then was to ask you, how did you start your journey of being a bodybuilder? What was the initial thing that caused you to take that step?
Yeah, great question. I think for me, it sort of, without giving my autobiography, but I guess it sort of stems back from, when I was young. I was very heavily invested in swimming. So that was my sort of, sport growing up within school, and moving towards, university, that my swimming, finished up, going to state titles and everything like that. And I went to university on the Gold Coast to study exercise science. And I think I needed the next thing in respect to training, because I'd trained all through my youth, and at university, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to school here now, I'm living on campus, like what is going to be my physical outlet? And I think because they had a university gym there, that was my sort of first interest, perhaps the closest thing that would enable me to be physically active. And that's probably where my bodybuilding interest really sort of accelerated. I just developed a love and a passion for that style of training. Started working there, and through the process of working there, became a trainer and sort of organically progressed like that. Went to study exercise science, finished that. So sort of everything I've ever done has been, or surrounding, health and fitness and bodybuilding as a whole. I think for me, as funny as it sounds, like, growing up and seeing, muscular magazines, my mom would take me to like the news agency or something like that. You used to be a kid sort of wandering through the store, and I'd pick up magazines of these guys that looked absolutely insane. And I'd be like, holy shit, like this is what you can look like? Well, what's involved in this? This is crazy. So, getting into training was probably something that motivated to me towards, seeing my body progress and seeing my physique progress and my fitness progress. And that was a motivator, in itself, first starting out and seeing that progression. Seeing what I was sort of capable and being able to lift and move, and not even just those physical aspects, but also, motivated by the fact that I could adhere to something for long enough. Like I was motivating others around me as well. So because I was working at the gym at the time, and people were seeing me progress from being, quite young into, growing muscle mass, etc. It was really motivating for others as well to see that. So I think that was probably my prime motivation towards getting into bodybuilding. And I think just through the process of, learning more in the field of studying exercise science, eventually I wanted to sort of put my expertise to practice, which meant becoming more of the athlete and eventually stepping on stage.
Yeah, nice. I can appreciate the journey of the gym bro, from going to being a member of the gym to then working at the gym and then kind of doubling down in that direction. That's kind of how things happened for me as well. I was a member of my gym before I started working there too, and progressed along that. So I respect to that.
I think because I was so, probably you're similar to this, but you go to the gym, you're so excited to be there, you talk to members, you become friends with people, you become friends with the people that work there, and then eventually they're like, hey, what are you doing? Like, why don't you work here? And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, this sounds great. And then that's sort of organically, how it happens. So it's probably that passion and that drive towards just exercise training and meeting people, excited about it. It's probably what drove us to start working at the gyms that we were originally training at.
Yeah, for sure. So what does it mean to you to be building your body the way you have been, to walk around and feel the way you do about what you've created? What does that mean to you?
I think that the definition of it has sort of changed over time. Like when I first started training, perhaps it was more about, asserting some level of, I wouldn't say dominance, but it's just, when you first start training, you have that internal drive towards, improving, but also maybe establishing yourself as someone who is strong in the eyes of others. It's sort of, you're somewhat driven from the views of others around you. And it's interesting because now, being a professional bodybuilder, it's less to do with that. And it's more to do with just my own internal drive towards, improving, going from that gym bro to, wearing, I think back and I slap myself, but, wearing like the string singlets and everything like that. And, you'd never see me in the gym wearing a string singlet now, because I just have no interest in what others think of me. Funnily enough, I have more of an interest towards, getting in there and just doing the work. So, and being humble in my approach to training as well, I think is very important. So I think my timeline towards, what it meant to be strong, as a bodybuilder has certainly shifted towards more of a humble approach to training now versus, when I first started.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because I think that perhaps one of the things that maybe puts a lot of guys off, and I know this from conversations I've had with dudes, is that they don't want to be that gym bro kind of guy. They don't want to be the dude flexing in the mirror and doing all that sort of stuff. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing, but some people have the really negative kind of connotation with that. And so, but what's interesting though, I think that if we ask a lot of dudes, especially dudes that started in their teenage years, I mean, as crass as it may seem, it's usually, well, I want to get the girls or whatever it might be, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's there is definitely that point where you're comparing yourself to some of the people around you, and you'd like to be someone who is thought of, in a positive way. And so, for the men that are listening to this right now, that's okay. Like if that's perhaps your driving force initially, and maybe you feel like that's a bit wanky or anything like that, maybe it starts that way. But as you go through the process, you start to realize that, hey, I just like doing this for me, or this just makes me a better man. This makes me a more disciplined person. This makes me more useful and more helpful for the people in my life that I care about. And if it maybe starts for perhaps some shallow reasons, that's okay. But know that, you can progress that as you get into it a little bit more. You can see the true benefits of something like this, which is, you realizing what your body's really capable of, and even what your mind's really capable of as you push yourself through these things.
Yeah, absolutely, man. That's so true. I think those initial motives when someone, for example, is getting into the gym when they're young, and versus 20 years into their craft, it's certainly a hell of a lot different, and it's less to do with the opinions and of others, and it's more to do with benefiting yourself. I think there are so many incredible benefits to being physically active, and it doesn't have to even be the gym. It could be cycling, it could be running, whatever it may be. I think, at the end of the day, someone who's getting into the fitness realm, as much as you and I would perhaps encourage them to, get into the gym, we know the benefits of that. We love it. It's our own, personal bias, for example. But, ultimately, it's just finding a type of training that you are going to be most motivated to perform. And I think, looking at it from the perspective of, your future self will certainly thank you when it comes to things such as like injury prevention, prevention of various different, chronic diseases, reduction in all-cause mortality as well. So it means potentially being, on this earth for longer with your family, with less comorbidities, and less, hospital expenses. So less deep, pocket in the wallet, is certainly going to, provide benefit in that matter. So, so I think for some of those individuals that are perhaps reserved into getting into their training, whether it be, for example, the gym, because of their reservations surrounding the identity in which they'll impose upon themselves, that sort of gym bro. It certainly doesn't have to be that. And I think it's more of an internalized thought, really an internal dialogue, because, at the end of the day, everybody is really in the gym just to get better, whatever that means. It could be better at, again, like you said, attracting the girls. It could be better at, lifting heavy weights on a bench press. It could just be better because, someone's struggling with their mental health and they want to get into the gym, and it's their physical outlet and therefore, their mental outlet as well. Ultimately, people are just training because they're wanting that sense of purpose and they're wanting to improve in some way. So, I think it is important to sort of get past that barrier of, I don't want to adopt this identity. I don't want to be seen as this gym bro. I think it's also the people you associate yourself with, So if you're going into the gym with the guys that wear the string singlets and they yell on every single rep, then yeah, certainly you're probably going to be seen as that person. But if you're in there and you're keeping to yourself and you're polite and you're communicative and you wipe the machine after you use it, then I don't see any issues in that regard.
Yeah, for sure. And even just to touch on something you mentioned there as well about reducing the likelihood of having to pay hospital bills and all that kind of stuff as you get older. I think that it's easy to, when you're in kind of that 20s, 30s, middle stage of your life where your health is kind of naturally not too bad unless you have really bad habits, where you can sort of maintain a decent level of fitness without necessarily having to have a consistent routine in place. It's easy to undervalue the importance of getting into those routines now. And you perhaps say, I don't need that, I don't need to train, I don't need to do sport or anything like that. But then, and perhaps let's say that the two main factors that were stopping you are time and the investment of money as well. You go, I've got other things I'm gonna put my time and money into, and thinking that you're saving time and money, when in the long run, what I think a lot of people are more likely to find is that, well, it's the cost in money moving forwards when they have to start to fix some of the issues that they've created for themselves with the life that they've built. Hospital bills, medication, specialist appointments, all this kind of stuff, surgeries, all this kind of stuff that can come along. And then there's also the time cost that goes along with everything you miss out on as a result of not being in good shape moving forwards. And also perhaps even just having a shorter life because of that too. So for the guys that are listening to this right now who, maybe don't see the true value of creating a routine for yourself right now in terms of your health and fitness, I know it's hard to consider the long-term ramifications because everyone's just living in the now, dealing with whatever the problems they've got today. However, by not considering those things, lads, you're really opening yourself up to some serious stress and cost in the future. So just take that into account when you think about, is this worth the money? Is this worth the time? I mean, obviously, I'm always going to say yes. I'm very biased, but in every example I know of, it's been a yes as well in some situations. So as you were saying before as well, Dan, find a way to do it that you actually enjoy, that you can be consistent with. It doesn't have to be gym, it might be football or basketball or, yoga or whatever it's going to be. Find something that you can stick to and be willing to invest in it, because what's happening with that too is that as we put our dollars down on anything in our life, we're creating, we're telling ourselves that this is important to me.
Mm.
I'm with my dollars, I am communicating with myself that this is worth that sacrifice. So if you spend your money on beer, then that's what you're telling yourself is important to you. If you're spending your money on cigarettes, that's what you're telling yourself is important to you. If you're spending your money on whatever it is, that's what you're telling yourself is a priority right now. So just by being willing to consistently invest in those areas of your life, you're also strengthening the idea that this is important to me, and you're going to continue to start to look for ways to optimize your health and the quality of your life.
Absolutely. Yeah. I completely agree in that manner. I think for some individuals, they can almost view exercise as, that initial cost that may not be worth it. It's like when finances start to get, for example, hard, it's like usually, exercise and nutrition are usually the things that are sort of pushed to the side. And I understand that, I completely understand that, but I think it is so important to value your exercise, your fitness, and your health as almost like a non-negotiable, because ideally your ability to enjoy other facets of life is really going to be reliant upon your ability to stay healthy as well. So yeah, I completely agree, mate.
So obviously we are, if we were going to suggest what a man could do to optimize his health and performance, obviously we have that gym bias to a degree. So then my question for you is, what are the benefits of getting into strength training and building muscle for men?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think from, touching upon, let's say, more the mental side of things first, can certainly help in improving, cognition, problem solving, like we said, talking about, psychological health in terms of, establishing purpose. In terms of, the physical side of things, obviously we've got an improvement in cardiovascular health and reduction in associated comorbidities with things such as cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, things like that. There's also a protective mechanisms in place associated with, brain function as well. So reduction in risk of things such as like dementia and Alzheimer's, as we get older too. There's obviously the physical benefits associated with injury prevention as well. So, not that we're cavemen running around doing incredibly physical things, but certainly it can reduce the onset of, osteoarthritis and things like that. Given that we do train, smartly, I think that's a really important, sort of caveat to throw out there as well, because, I think a lot of individuals can somewhat look at exercise and think, well, I might injure myself if I'm, lifting too heavy or things like that. And I certainly think that can be sometimes a barrier in the forefront of, some people's mind associated with training and exercise and pushing their body. And I think that's one of the importance of really pushing forth that sort of gradual exposure to training. So everybody starts small, and they gradually, build themselves up, over time. Also the benefits of training associated with reduction in things such as like obesity. So obviously we're getting more fit. As a result of that, a decrease in things such as like metabolic syndrome, reduction in onset of things such as like diabetes as well. So, there are, and even in terms of exercise, there are some benefits surrounding some types of reduction in some types of cancer. So that's obviously a really important one as well. So, I mean, there's literally, and I could probably go on for the next 40 minutes associated with the benefits of exercise, right? And benefits of training. So, I think in any decision, any habit establishment, we're always thinking about sort of the way up of like cost to benefit, right? That sort of cost to benefit ratio. And I think exercise is just, the benefit is right up here and the cost is extremely low, right? So I truthfully think that every single person on this planet should be doing something physically active and find passion and interest towards that because of the benefits that, I've just aforementioned.
Absolutely. I think that, you're a very learned man, so you're using lots of long sciencey terms for some of the stuff you're talking about. And just to add on top of everything you just explained, that, there's this ability to massively reduce the risk of all these different diseases and ailments that are going to come over time if we don't start to look after ourselves. But, a big thing for me is just the confidence boost you get from pushing yourself and knowing that you're capable of things that are difficult. That's a massive thing. And as you mentioned right at the start about the mental health effects of getting into your training, that to me is also like a boost in confidence. I'm the kind of person who's disciplined. I show up, I move the heavy things. Maybe it's just for the sake of moving the heavy things, but I'm capable of doing that. And I have confidence in my ability to help a friend move house, or I have confidence in my ability to do a task that needs to be completed for my family. I'm not worrying about whether I'm capable of that or needing to get someone else to help me. Not that there's an issue with getting other people to help you, but as men, I think we like to be as independent as possible. And I think if we build the strength ourselves, it doesn't just impact our physical health, our mental health, the quality of the choices that we make moving forwards, but it also makes us into a great role model too, especially for guys who are watching this with families. Like, how do you want your kids to be when they grow up?
Absolutely, yeah.
Physically weak? Do you want them to be out of shape? Do you want them to not enjoy exercise? Well, all of that is more likely if you have all of those same feelings towards it too. There's a certain level of responsibility to put in this extra bit of work yourself, even if it's a challenge for you too. And that's again another reason why it's if that is a struggle for you, you're a guy listening to this right now, and this is not a natural thing for you to want to do, but you do see the importance of it. Get yourself around people that already do it. Get yourself around people that are already good at this stuff, and who are caring and encouraging and supportive. Whether it means getting yourself a strength coach like Dan here, coming and joining Unbreakable Man, or wherever you are in the world, going and finding, what's in my area that will allow me to meet other like-minded people that can help me on this journey.
Absolutely. I almost think that, we can reflect back to ourselves, for example, when we, first started training. I first started swimming. I first started getting into the gym and exercising. Like, there is a hell of a lot of discomfort associated with starting new in fitness. Like, everything just hurts that much more, right? The DOMS you experience associated with training, which is that delayed onset muscle soreness, is through the roof. The recoverability is pretty damn low because every single thing that you do in the gym is a novel stimulus. And plus you've got a trainer that's, trying to push you past that. So I completely understand, that discomfort associated with training and sort of first getting into it. I think that and you can probably vouch for this, there's probably that point where it's not necessarily like the training gets easier, but your resiliency towards it certainly gets higher. So, you get soreness, but you somehow enjoy the soreness that you get. We've all had that sort of workout where we've trained, and then the next day you're feeling your chest, you're like, oh man, that's a bit sore, but you like keep poking it because it's somewhat exciting that you've trained hard the previous day. Whereas someone first getting into training, that is somewhat alarming. Like, they're experiencing pain and discomfort in areas that they've perhaps just not experienced before, and that for some individuals can be alarming. It can be deterring as well. So I think for anyone who's starting out in their fitness journey, whatever it may be, it's that confidence that your resiliency towards this will improve over time. And I think with that, your enjoyment towards it improves as well. So it's almost pushing past that initial discomfort to allow for that enjoyment factor to really solidify in whatever type of exercise you partake in.
Yeah, well said. So then, for the guys that are watching this and who are now considering, okay, look, I do see the importance of this, and I want to start to take some action. What are, let's say, top 3 to 5 tips that you would have for any man who's about to get started with some strength training and some muscle building?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think the first thing would be, layering a foundation, which is essentially surrounding habits and routine. That's, I think as a bodybuilder, that's something that, as particularly as a coach, something that I'm constantly, establishing to new onboarded athletes, or perhaps, bodybuilders who are new within the sport. It's just the importance surrounding, routine and structure. I think one of the things that can be incredibly deterring for a lot of people getting into the craft is that there's so much decision fatigue, right? There's so many voices out there telling you to do, X, Y, Z, train this split, train that day, don't eat this, eat that, don't eat this. And we've both been around in the profession for long enough to almost see almost everything either be praised or demonized. So, that kind of leads into my second thing is surrounding yourself with an evidence-based approach to nutrition and training. I think that's, incredibly important. I could probably list off, a ton of resources, but I could get into that. But I think, surrounding yourself with proper education around training is very important as well. It doesn't necessarily mean, having to go and study a course or anything like that. But I think when you're more educated with respect to what you're doing, you can buy into it more so. Okay, coach is telling me to do, X, Y, Z this week. Here is telling me to eat these things, or is encouraging that I don't eat these things. If I don't know why that's being prescribed or I'm being recommended these things, I'm probably not going to have that buy-in, and therefore I'm not really interested in that. So I think, first thing would be establishing a routine and structure, having certain days of the week that you're exercising, having structure, even if it's, let's say you haven't established the proper foods that you want to consume yet, but at least having structure around, okay, this time I eat my breakfast, this time I have my lunch, this time I have my dinner. So you've got that routine in place. Secondly to that, education. So, empowering yourself with education and resources, and most likely getting a coach if you're new to the craft. I guess number three is I start to look at it from the perspective of, prioritizing your lowest hanging fruit. So it's, what do you want to achieve out of your fitness? Okay, if I want to get, stronger, well, chances are I'm probably going to have to do some resistance-based training. So it's essentially understanding the modality associated with, the type of training that you want to do, whether it be strength training. Okay, I want to improve my cardiovascular fitness, or I'm probably going to have to do some sort of cardio-based training as well. Again, that feeds into the routine around, how am I going to structure this within my day? I think from a nutritional perspective, it's probably for most individuals prioritizing a greater allotment of protein within their diet. I think that's a huge one. If we look at, the Australian populace, the Australian recommendations with regards to protein intake is very minimal comparison to what you would need as being a strength athlete or someone who is partaking in resistance-based sport. Your protein recommendation almost doubles, so a lot of the average Australian is just not consuming enough protein to really appease their goals surrounding, improvement in lean mass and fitness, etc. So they're probably some of the sort of the initial tips associated with, with training. Certainly optimizing variables, I then go into things such as like prioritizing your sleep as being a non-negotiable. I think is so damn important, and it's just something that is so incredibly overlooked by, many people. It's like the last thing someone, thinks of when it comes to improving their performance. Hey, I'm really struggling with, X, Y, Z. And then, you find out that they're very active in their role. They do a whole lot of strength training, and they're not prioritizing their sleep as much. And I can also be the first to vouch that I've been in that situation as well. And I've felt the difference associated with getting quality sleep versus not getting quality sleep, and the impact that it's had on my result as well. So that's an important, and that's almost, that does feed back into the established routine around your week, right? Okay, I go to bed at this time, wake up at this time, I train at this time, I eat these meals at this time. I think that's so important.
Yeah, sleep is a big one. I mean, we literally had that exact same conversation. You're looking at my check-in for the week and you're like, okay, well, you did 4 strength sessions. You did like 6 group sessions, 3 Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu classes, and you got 6 hours sleep a night. And you're like, yeah, no wonder you're not gaining strength, Mitch. It's like, oh, okay, fine. Got to try and get to bed a little bit earlier. Dropped a few of those classes as well just to reduce the energy output. And yeah, lo and behold, literally the very next week that I started doing that, I started seeing the movement in the weights again in the right direction. So sleep, man. And I train guys who are kind of from 30 all the way up to sort of 55. And so many of those dudes have terrible sleeping habits. And it's, obviously it's hard when you've got children, but for a lot of them, they just struggle to get to sleep, or they wake up during the night, for one reason or another. And I think it'd be really, really good, for anyone listening to this who has that same kind of experience of sleep, do not neglect how much you are leaving on the table by not fixing that.
Absolutely,
It's
yeah.
hard to understate it's hard to overstate how important that is.
It's
And
like supply demand, you know what I mean? So you think of it from the perspective of someone who, maybe doesn't get a whole lot of sleep, maybe they sleep 5 hours per night. All of a sudden, on top of that, they're wanting to prioritize, getting stronger, getting into the gym, and all of a sudden demanding more from their body within their week. All of a sudden they go from not training at all to, doing 3 group classes a week. And then they're actually, prioritizing any more sleep really. And so we get, simply from the perspective of supply demand, you're probably going to need more supply in the way of energy availability from, eating more, I think is a big thing. And also obviously getting quality sleep as well. I think, particularly for guys who are in the gym and they're first getting into it, there's that whole premise of, eating higher amounts of protein, etc. But I think for a lot of individuals, it's eating more, but it's eating more of the right foods. That's the primary focus here. Food volume and food density are two different things. So, look at food volume as being the sheer grammage of the food, and the density as being the caloric density. Look at something that like fruits and vegetables, obviously, they are quite voluminous and less dense in the way of calories. So, you know, often when someone, like when I was working as a trainer in the gym, I'd be encouraging people to eat more of the right things. They'd say to me, "Hey Dan, like you're getting me to eat a hell of a lot more food than I've ever eaten before." And I'm like, "Yeah, basically, because you've never touched a vegetable for the last 5 years of your life." And all of a sudden you're eating more, but you're also losing weight. It's because the density of these calories is much less. You're eating less calories, but you're actually eating more quality food. So I think that's, a really good sort of segue, I guess, is just the importance of the nutritional side of things as well.
Yeah, awesome. So we've kind of covered the what, the why, and the how. So for those guys who are watching this right now, I really hope that you feel like you can see the importance of this and that you have a good starting point in the sense of, okay, I've got to build a routine that includes sleep, food, how I'm going to fit my exercise in, getting a coach, or, having some level of accountability in place, or education wise, either you coach yourself by doing a little bit of research. But, if you get yourself a coach, essentially what you've done is taken all that time it's going to require you to research, and you've shrunken it right down because someone's going to give you the answers instead of you having to go and find them. And that's not a bad thing either. That's why I work with Dan. That's why I work with my business mentors, because I don't want to spend the next year, 2 years trying to figure out what's the perfect way for me to do this. I want to know right now so I can just start doing it. So it's a massive benefit of that, having a coach. And, the next thing is making sure you get your recovery side of things right as well. So those are some really great places for you guys to start. And I wanted to just wrap up this conversation by asking you one final little personal question. So who has been your biggest role model, mentor that's helped you become the kind of man that you are today?
That's a great question. I mean, I think about it from the perspective of my family, probably mostly my mom, I would say. She's been paramount. She's been there from, the start in relation to driving me to the pool when I was a swimmer, to, taking me to university, helping me to, just all facets of my life, I would say, was my mom's mostly been there for sure. I think in terms of, a mentor associated with training, I mean, I've had many, many, many great mentors. Most recently, obviously Brandon Kempter, but I've had some fantastic mentors all through, my career so far. And, I think back to when I was working, on the Gold Coast at the Griffith University, fitness center, Uni Fitness. It was a woman named Jeanette, and she was sort of the person who took me under her wing when I was first, just new into the fitness industry. This 16, 17-year-old kid working behind reception, learning what exercises are, etc. She was really that mentor figure. She was a bodybuilder as well, so she sort of, I guess, was a big influencer in terms of my interest towards that. When I finished university and I started working as an exercise physiologist in more of the sort of chronic disease and rehabilitation setting, my mentor at that time was one of the colleagues that I had, which is named David Hill, and I used to actually did my placements with him when I was at uni, and that's how I sort of went down that route. And that certainly opened up my eyes in terms of, injury prevention, chronic disease prevention in terms of the benefits associated with training. And then moving into, the bodybuilding realm, that's where, I would say my mentor has been Brandon. So I've sort of had, multiple mentors within the fitness realm with each their own sort of specific, in terms of, their focal point within my journey. And I would say that everyone through that timeline has been imperative in terms of, producing the man I am today and the coach I am, an athlete I am today as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much for your time today, Dan. I really appreciate it, mate.
Of course, mate. Absolute pleasure. Like I said, any opportunity to come on and talk about, training, fitness, bodybuilding, mental health for men has been is incredibly important to me and passionate about it. So thank you again for bringing me on, man.
Good on you. Cheers, Dan.
Thank you.
Hey, mate, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Unbreakable Man podcast. If you did, it would be absolutely fantastic if you could leave us a 5-star review, because that's going to help us get our message in front of more men who need to hear it. Now, if you have some feedback for me, I'd love to hear that too. Comment down below. And if you just need some mini doses of Unbreakable Man motivation throughout your week, then you can follow us across all social platforms. On Facebook, it's Unbreakable Man Challenge. On Instagram, it's Unbreakable Man _challenge. And on TikTok and YouTube, it's just Unbreakable Man. Your support would be absolutely invaluable. Now, last but not least, do not forget, men aren't born, they're built.